Buenos dias, Alan, and thank you for joining us today at Business Spotlight Series. Today, I'm excited to introduce Alan Mahon, founder of Brewgooder, what they do is they brew a fairer world for all, one beer at a time. Alan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Javier. Buenas to you as well. Estoy muy emocionado para hablar contigo.
Yo también, and there will be some viewers who speak Spanish, so that's our two pennies for, or two pesetas. Great. Okay, so Alan, it's amazing the business you are building. And my first question is, how do you get into this business?
Yeah, it's everyone's first question. And it's one I'm never get kind of sick of answering, I guess. I think really it kind of started when I was at university. So I went to the University of Glasgow. I studied politics, but I knew I didn't want to get into politics as a career, certainly not out of university. But I didn't really know what else I wanted to do. And for me, getting to the end of my university career, having lots of friends, having lots of really great memories and experiences, I had friends who were all, going to be doctors or lawyers or, lots of different professions. Or that's the way it seemed, at least, where everyone had their career kind of mapped out for them. And I didn't really have that. And at the time, that was actually quite a nerve-wracking thing for me. But it also, looking back on it and reflecting on it, it was, I could really do anything within reason that I wanted to. But I didn't have much by way of a CV in many respects. And I knew that, if I were to apply for graduate jobs or jobs outside of professional career stuff, I would need something on my CV. And when I was growing up, my mum was always kind of a great example to me. She worked in the NHS. She, volunteered a lot of her time to look after kids, to look after, even elderly folk. She still does that at 72 years old, but, throughout my entire life, she's always been a person who kind of gave up her time. And I volunteered, I guess, something quite, that we both shared volunteering in, with the guys at Reach Out. But to me, that was just a lot of playing football, which didn't seem like too much hard work, and maybe something that kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone. So I actually decided to go to Nepal for 3 months to work on a sort of educational project out there. Went with University of Glasgow student volunteers abroad. And on the way, not even on the way, but even before you go there, you get injections and sort of needles for all sorts of tropical diseases. And I'm a big sort of scaredy cat when it comes to needles, full stop, still am. And, we're getting injections which are, the size of your arm, a couple of times before you go, and you're paying quite a lot of money as a student to make that happen. But the one piece of advice that they tell you not to do for free is basically not to drink water. And somewhere along the journey, I ended up drinking, water on the site or whatever it was, and getting kind of progressively more ill, I guess, towards the end of that experience in Nepal, that time in Nepal, to the point where when I came back, I had to get some tests done. And actually, I had a parasite sort of inside me, which was cleared within a week with a pretty common prescription of an antibiotic called metronidazole. And that kind of left me, I think, with this feeling or, calling, if you like, or vocational aspect of what I wanted to do next, which was, you had lived your life in such a comfortable way, in such a way where you were always looking forward at the next opportunity, the next chance to prove yourself, to make your life better, to make the life of people around you better. Actually, should you consider a career that makes that possible for, future generations of people who, through no fault of their own, there were people born on the same day as me, 30th of April 1990, who never made it past our collective fifth birthday for something as simple as not having access to safe water. So I actually spent a year applying for one job in particular for the Government Department for International Development, and in East Kilbride, and thought I was going to get that. And turns out I didn't get that. I was rejected from that, as well as tons of other international development jobs that I applied for. And when I did start working, it was kind of by fluke of having a friend who just set up a cafe in Edinburgh called Social Bite. And at the time, they were, just allowing people to pay for suspended food and coffee items for homeless and vulnerable people to be able to access, and then starting to employ homeless people. And by the time I went on that journey with them, we were building villages for vulnerable people. We were changing government housing policy, and that was a fantastic journey for me. It opened my eyes to being able to build a brand in Social Bite and do really fun things. But also to kind of make sure that building of that brand, that business, was actually leaving a legacy, in Social Bite's case, very immediately in the cities in which they worked. And when I went from being a poor student to a poor graduate, I had a wee bit more money, and I started buying two things really. Really good coffee and really good beer. And for me, my friends, we were planning nights out around where did the best beer, what had the local beers on, the American beers, the wacky styles and weird and wonderful concoctions that was sort of booming at the time from a craft beer perspective. And I thought, was there an opportunity to combine something that I really cared about, and initially in that water space, was something I thought was just a cool industry to get involved in. I was a 25-year-old adult male. I, fell into the craft beer Venn diagram quite easily and comfortably. And could I put the two of the things together in Brewgooder, which was the name that we sort of came up with for obvious pun reasons. For native English speakers, you can relate it to do-gooder, I guess. And then once I decided to do that, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, but a pretty rewarding one for sure.
Brilliant. So that happened in 2016.
Yes. So, probably in 2012, that's when I went to Nepal. In 2013, that's when I started working for Social Bite. In 2015 is when I probably had the idea for Brewgooder conceptually. And then 2016 is when we started the business, I guess, officially and launched it to the public.
Brilliant. Who did you start with? Was it just a couple of friends, or how did?
Yeah, I guess like for me, I was very, very fortunate in the job that I had, put me in connection with lots of really quite influential people within the Scottish business community. So I guess the first person I went to was the founder of Social Bite, Josh, who encouraged me in those early days and definitely enabled me to feel confident in bringing this thing out into the world. And then quickly after that, there was a few people that I'd known from university who started working with us, and there was one guy in particular who I met quite randomly, actually, who I pitched the idea of Brewgooder to, and he sort of fell in love with the idea of what we could do and we could achieve, and then joined the business, and by dint of longevity and hard work and sort of steering my journey as well, is our co-founder to all intents and purposes. There's been lots of people that we've lent on at different points of the journey. And we brew with various different people. We don't actually have our own brewing facilities. We develop the recipes, we manage the quality control, but ultimately we actually rely on quite a lot of different people around the brewing industry, which is a very collaborative industry, to brew our beer, from people in Scotland all the way down to people in Berkshire. We've had a lot of help both at the start and basically throughout our entire 8 years, nearly 9 years of running the business.
Brilliant. Well, you've made the 5-year milestone, because was it 80% of businesses don't make it to 5 years. So
which is a great, certainly it feels good. But I mean, 5 years was 2021, which was a really terrible time for the beer industry. So to even make it through, that year into year 6, but I think in year 8 into year 9, that's really when we're only starting to get our act together. I think the first 3 or 4 years, certainly of Brewgooder, was a bit of an experiment, a bit of not knowing really what we were doing, but trying to have this, business and this vision that was quite disruptive and different. And a lot of promise of what it could be. The business operates in a very simple model of for every beer that we sell, there's a proportion of that revenue that goes into our foundation, and our foundation funds clean water projects, funds local projects around food access, access to opportunities and equality. We're sourcing grain from developing countries in order to have different impacts there. And we feel like we're just getting into our groove in year 8 versus, year 5 and certainly years 1, 2, and 3 and 4.
You said something very, very interesting. You said the word vision, and you also said we didn't know what we were doing. So, and it's so refreshing to hear that, because there are so many businesses that struggle, and sometimes at the beginning you don't know what you are doing, but through failure and trial and again, you make it work. And as long as you have that vision of where you want to get to, what the business looks like when finished, then that's what makes you, get through the bad times, if you like.
Yeah, and listen, a lot of the bad times were self-inflicted, right? Like they're, just making mistakes, sometimes being too ambitious, trying to run before we could even sit. It's probably not even run before we could walk.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think we've held on, we've pivoted our business model. At the start, we were giving 100% of our profits away, which is great for the first 2 years, but then started to become a real issue because we couldn't actually invest in growing the business, larger than around about 750,000 in turnover. It was actually getting really challenging to break through that mark. We redeveloped it. We, went back to basics. We said we wanted an impact model that can scale. And, we're going to be a 4.5 million turnover business this year, I think. And that's quite small as a business goes, but it's in a really competitive market where we're actually punching, I think, relatively above our weight. But that's not to say we're not still making mistakes. We're not still learning from those things. We're not still, having to struggle through some really challenging times, not least because our industry has been battered over the past 4 years. What was already a very dynamic and competitive and fast changing market, has been accelerated by all sorts of changes, whether it's COVID, whether it's cost of living crisis, whether it's cost of inputs crisis, all that sort of stuff. We're still trying to ride the wave, but we haven't done anything yet that's been fatal to the business. And I think you're right. What sustains you is that vision to keep building what you had in your head, because as entrepreneurs, I think you can pitch a business to somebody, and no matter how good the pitch is, it's really never going to equate to what you have in your head as the founder or as the I don't want to say visionary. I think that's a bit too grandiose, but the person who sees all the way to the end, even if they can't necessarily describe it in great detail for others, they're motivated by it because they can see it. And I think one of the big things that I've recognized is actually, the vision for what this brand could be is actually much, much bigger than the vision that I had in 2016. And as long as that vision keeps getting bigger and more refined and better and more motivating for yourself and others, then I think that is what sustains you through really quite challenging periods. And I don't think there's been a single day, let alone a single year that hasn't been challenging and it hasn't needed that constant reminder of why you're doing it and what's different about our business versus others that keeps you going.
Yeah, brilliant. What is the vision of the business? What's the vision?
Yeah, I guess it's quite a simple but quite a grand vision, I guess. Put simply, it's to brew a fairer world for all. And I know that sounds quite almost like naive, but when you think about it, our business is built for scale as a brand. We could be selling 10 times more beer next year and 10 times more beer after that and not really touch the surface of the UK beer market, let alone the global one. But what's amazing, I think, about beer is that it's such a social product that it can't really be replaced. And I think, even in a world where sobriety and no and low is there, it's still no and low beer. It's still the Guinness Zeros and it's the experience of buying a pint or buying a round for somebody, which is actually quite an inherently social thing. And I think if we can try and harness some of that inherent sociability or the positive things behind beer, the community building aspect behind the pub or getting together to celebrate or even commiserate with beer. And if we can harness that and point that in positive directions, then actually we could do some really amazing things for lots of people. And our impact to date is actually pretty big for a company of our size, through water projects, through food access projects, through sourcing our different grains. We've already invested nearly, I think it's £250,000 in projects, of which most of that has actually come in the past 2 years. And actually, as you go forward and you grow the business, that might actually be a number that's quite achievable on an annual basis. So, that's the vision. There's lots of elements to that vision. There's lots of elements to the company trying to be the best company it can be culturally, which is really challenging in current market environments. Trying to source as ethically and sustainably as we can, and then trying to have impact as sustainably as we can as well. So there's lots of different things that go into adding up to that vision. But if you put them all together, it's basically brewing a fair world for everybody.
Brilliant, very catchy vision and memorable as well. How do you sell? What's your channel? Who's your client?
Yeah, so I guess if you just imagine anywhere you can drink beer or buy beer is basically our potential customer. So we have on-trade distribution, which is very, very challenging just because of the nature of the market. It's very costly to serve. It's well guarded by the larger beer companies in the industry. It's hard to break into. But we sell to pubs in Scotland, in Manchester and London, through distributors. We have some really iconic venues, I guess, in Glasgow, where you're based, from the likes of Sub Club, all the way down to Manchester's New Century Hall. We're finding a lot of success in quite ethically driven or socially conscious sort of venues. And then if you go into the off trade, which is groceries and supermarkets and convenience stores, probably our biggest customer is the Co-op, followed by Sainsbury's, Waitrose, nationally across the UK, where we're effectively trying to build a brand that is an impact brand in the beer space, not a craft beer brand that does good things, and trying to do that, and trying to sell that vision to the customer as the retailer or the bar is very, very different from trying to sell that vision to the consumer who's ultimately going to drink it. And they're two almost opposing forces, right? Because a lot of people want to stock you for the ethical credentials, if you like, but that's not what's going to actually get the consumer drinking the beer. The consumer's going to drink the beer because it's good quality, because it looks cool, and because it basically is a bit of a flex on them or their values. And you have to make it desirable to the consumer, as well as making it, tick a lot of the boxes for the customer as well. So we're growing at a really fast pace. Last year we grew 80 something percent. This year it'll be a lot less than that, but in a compound way. It's still quite significant, and there's a lot that we're not even scratching the surface on in the on-trade and the off-trade. So yeah, that's our kind of customer base. We do some direct-to-consumer stuff, but that had its moment during the pandemic, and I think that's not as big, certainly for individual breweries, as it once was.
Yeah. Can people buy your beer online?
Yeah. You can go to brewgooder.com, and then you can probably find it if you live in a major city quite close as well. So Co-op, Sainsbury's, Waitrose. If you're in Scotland, you can find it in Tesco's, Morrison's, and Asda as well.
Brilliant. Actually, I went to Poundland across the road, and I saw a chocolate protein bar.
Yeah.
£2. I said, wow. Anyway, I bought a few. Amazing. Then I went there a few weeks later to Poundland, and there was no protein bar. I said, what is this chocolate protein bar that you used to sell? We don't get it anymore.
Yeah.
I went online, and I found it was an Irish company supplying it. And I said, well, can I buy it online? And the price was more expensive than in Poundland. So maybe there was a dispute on pricing, and
yeah, or potentially it was like a liquidation of short-dated stock, which is probably what it was, because there are routes for that even in our industry
Okay, I see,
to
I
do
see.
it. But yeah, so hopefully you don't find too many Brewgooder products
No.
in the future. That means we're not managing our stock properly.
Yeah. Okay, and COVID, you mentioned 2021 was a bad year, but I thought COVID boosted the sales of alcohol and
In one sense, right? And it boosted. I think it certainly there's a channel switch into the off trade, but that's not as profitable as the on trade in many respects. So it might seem like that, but it was very, very challenging for the entire market. And listen, I'm not going to deny like we probably had a better 2021 than we had a 2019, if you like. But we were facing sort of an existential crisis of what was going to happen to the industry for sure. And then I think but I think that time kind of gave us, myself and James, my co-founder, a little bit of time to actually think, right, what the hell are we doing? You know, what we've done to date, we don't think worked. And we kind of called it version one of Brewgooder, which was, can we create a charity mission within the beer space? Yes, you know, we did do that. Was that the summit of our ambitions? No. Did we want it to be more mainstream and more accessible? Yes. So we moved on to version two, which was, and then version one before the pandemic, we only had one beer in one format. When we moved into version two, which was 2021, we had more styles, more product formats. We became a craft beer that did good things, and now we're moving into this what we call the V3 space, which is an impact brand in beer with, you know, core products that are available ubiquitously in different formats, supported by, you know, maybe some innovation around the edges to keep it interesting and to be creative, but ultimately to drive those core products are meant to drive. Sorry, those flagship products are meant to drive impact and commerciality and all that sort of stuff. So 2021, don't get me wrong, was not a great year in many respects. It was quite a challenging one, but it was almost like a bit of a crucible of what Brewgooder was about. It kind of changed our dynamic from a leadership point of view. It changed our dynamic from what we wanted to achieve, and I guess it fundamentally flipped our business model into something that was potentially scalable. So yeah, I wouldn't have asked for it again. I certainly wouldn't have asked for it then, but we do think the pandemic allowed us to make a number of changes that made the 2024 Brewgooder a lot more achievable.
brilliant. On that note, Alan, what are your plans, your aspirations for the business for the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think the next 5 years are going to be really interesting, right? Because the majority of consumers in the beer market are going to become overwhelmingly of a sort of late Gen X, millennial, and early Gen Z cohort, right? And if you kind of draw a loop around those guys, they're the people who are much more likely to value the ethics and sustainability and, you know, character and morals of a business, I guess, highly within a hierarchy of other considerations for sure. But that actually presents an opportunity for us to say, well, actually, we're the guys who've always been doing this. Like, this is why we were founded in many respects. So we think there's an enormous opportunity for us to grow in the UK and also to grow abroad, really, because ultimately, you know, we're not geographically located. Like, we're not a Glasgow based business, or we're not a Scottish, you know, that's not part of our identity as such. Part of our identity, or our core identity, is that we want to do good things for the world. So we think that there's massive opportunity for us to grow. So we want to, you know, become a 100,000 hectoliter business. Right now we're probably just over a tenth of that, maybe 12.5% of that. That will require us to, I think, work quite strategically to engage bigger players within our industry for sure. You know, whether it's people who can give us access to the on trade, or people who can export us, you know, larger retailers, all those sorts of things. And if we do that, we get to that size, we'll be making considerable impact every year, you know, that. And for me, that's the essence of what Brewgooder has to be. You know, it has to be it has to be a sustainable vehicle for creating good news stories and good vibes and positivity and empowerment and opportunity for people through the success of the business. And then if you sort of look below that, you know, we want to, I guess, have the source of that income for our foundation. We want that to be as ethical as possible. So that will be, you know, integrating supply chains that maybe are a little bit different from the usual beer market, using, you know, different grains which are actually grown in developing countries in order to have a better sort of ethical footprint in our supply chain. That's maybe to, you know, go on a journey to reduce carbon, you know, as much as possible in our supply chain. As we grow, that's to be a better place to work. There's lots of different things that are under that, and I think between now and, you know, 2029 or 2030, as you've asked in the question, it's just trying to be the best company that we can be in all those different areas, and if that looks like even greater success, then happy days. If it looks like less success than that, then it's still pretty good from where we started. But I think the next few years will be definitely recruiting allies to the Brewgooder movement after having, you know, spent a couple of years proving that we are different for many different reasons.
That's great, Alan. And it's for consumers of beer like myself. I'm not a heavy consumer, but I like my beer here and there. It's great to have these local, you know, companies, as opposed to the large brewers who are, you know, tasteless beer. You know, it's incredible. They still sell anything. There has been a search of local companies producing beer, right?
Yeah, I mean, craft is a really interesting space. I mean, we're sort of in the craft space almost by default because I don't think there's anywhere else to put us. But yeah, I mean, I think there is a bit of proliferation of local, you know, based craft breweries. But in the main, actually, when you look at it, it's consolidated around quite a few, maybe 10 or 12 different breweries within the UK that kind of dominate the market, of which we are probably one of the smaller of those 10 or 12. And then you've got the sort of local catchment, local models. But it's challenging for them, right? Because it's a challenging time for the on-trade. It's a challenging time for people who, you know, maybe wouldn't have thought twice about spending £5 on a can of beer in 2019, you know, find it very, very difficult to spend £5 for lots of different reasons, right? Cost of living, just generally their life has maybe changed. But that's kind of the lifeblood of what makes craft beer good and interesting and different from larger brands. I think what we want to do is be a mainstream large beer brand, if you like, but keep the ethos, keep the focus on quality, and, you know, bring something genuinely different, you know, even from that macro space and that craft space, and try and forge our own little bubble, if you like, of why we think we exist to do beer.
Brilliant. What would you say, Alan, what piece of advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
I think I've been asked this question quite a few different times, and I probably have given little pieces of advice that are different each time, which I think is still okay. Because you learn every time you get, you know, you're a different person every time you get asked the question, and you've had a different day. I guess my number one thing would just be like to relax. Like when I was 18, I was always trying to, for some reason, prove myself. And I was always eager and ambitious to get along. Whereas now, actually, you know, I'm 34 and actually taking more time to decide and to improve and to test and to learn would actually have led to better results. So I think just relax, but also just also have faith in yourself that if you work hard enough, the graft will pay off and there will be a reward that is the lagging indicator of effort. So yeah, I wish I could take my 18-year-old self out for a pint, but also I wouldn't want to lose all the things that my 18-year-old self could also teach me as a 34-year-old. So I'd say there'd be maybe a few pints consumed in that conversation.
Definitely. And you make better decisions if you are relaxed than if you are
yes, of course, definitely.
Brilliant. So just wrapping up a little bit, what's your favorite book?
Oh wow. Favorite book. I guess favorite book. Hmm. So there's two ways to answer that really. What book could have changed the direction or course of my life, and what book do I go back to very regularly? They're almost probably both from the same author. I think the first one, the book that kind of, and it's probably cliche, but was The Stranger by Albert Camus, which I'm actually reading in Spanish or trying to read in Spanish
Wow.
right now. El Extranjero. So I'm trying to read that. So that, yeah, that was definitely a book as a young guy that I really loved. I just loved how different it seemed, even, new and quite shocking, even though the book was written in 1941. But I think the book that I really love is also by Albert Camus, and it's called The Fall. And it's a guy who's basically admitting to, everyone, including himself, saw him as a really great person, but actually underneath he was actually not so great. And I think it's a really something I've come back to as a at different stages of my life to pick up and read, and got different things from it. And both books are very, very short, and they're very easy to read in English. I'm sure they're better in the original French. But yeah, probably be The Stranger, and then probably be The Fall.
Brilliant. I'm gonna look them up,
Yeah. If I manage to finish my Spanish version, I'll send it back to you. But it'll have lots of squiggly lines where I've had to look up what that word meant.
And my dad does the same with English, just underlines and makes comments. So wonderful.
Yeah.
If you could choose a superpower, what would you go for?
It's funny. I actually wrote down my superpowers that I think I possess, and then my kryptonite, which works against those superpowers, as an exercise ages and ages ago. If I had one superpower, and I think this is something that wouldn't just be for me, it would be just for the world. It would be, I would love to learn to be as happy with other people's successes as I am with my own. And I'd love to teach that to kids, that you can actually, if you approach the world like it was your favorite football team, when they win, you win, right? And you're nothing to do with that, right? You're nothing to do with the field and the passes and the striker scoring, but you identify so much with that. And I think if I had one superpower, it would be to identify with everybody's success as if it were my own, or as if it was my football club. And I know that's not flying or invisibility or laser vision or whatever, but I think that would be much more
It's
beneficial
even
to
better,
myself.
even better.
Yes.
A selfless. No, that's very good. Very good of
Yeah.
you. And finally, if you could spend a day in the life of, who would that be? Living or dead? You can go as back as you want.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you said that before we talked, you said that your dad was your hero, which is, something that's really cool to hear. My dad passed away when I was a baby, and I'd love to know him in that respect, and I would love to spend a day in his life and just see what he was like, I guess. Nothing too grand, I'm not a historical figure. I'm sure there's lots of historical figures that would feature below that, but yeah, if I had to say anybody, it probably would be my dad. Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant, great answer. Alan, well, it's been a real pleasure to have you join us today at Business Spotlight, and for sharing your experience to date. And well, thank you.
Nice one. Thank you so much.